We've all seen countless TV shows where a patient falls into a coma. The weeping family members try everything possible to resuscitate their loved one, from standing by their side and reading them stories to playing their favorite music, all in hopes of breaking through. Unfortunately, comas are medically complicated phenomenon with different causes and effects, and despite all our advances in modern medicine, we remain mostly in the dark about how to successfully treat one. But what exactly happens to your body when you're in a coma? First, we have to be clear that comas are very different from sleep, despite the fact that the origin of the word comes from the Greek for coma or deep sleep. Comas are not sleep, however, and are instead various forms of unconsciousness that render a person unable to respond to any external stimuli. You can play the loudest, heaviest death metal in the world right next to someone who's comatose, and you won't succeed in doing anything except really annoying the neighbors. Likewise, you can even physically hurt people in a coma, and they will remain completely oblivious and unresponsive. In times in the not-too-distant past, this was sometimes used as treatment, with doctors trying to shock their victims back into consciousness. Everything was tried, from exposing parts of the body to open flames, to severely dropping the body's temperature with ice, to even bloodletting from the head directly. One treatment even included wholly emptying the stomach. We guess because the doctors thought that if a patient got hungry enough, the body would force them to wake up. Or maybe they really were just throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at the problem, which we're sure was also tried. Comas can occur as a result of serious trauma or as a deliberate medical treatment by doctors. They are typically brought on by traumatic head injury, and it's believed that it's the brain's way of shutting down so it can focus on repairing itself. They can also, however, be brought on by a stroke or a brain tumor, drug or alcohol abuse, or an illness such as diabetes or infection. Most of the time, a coma only lasts a few weeks though, but past this period, the patient can enter a persistent vegetative state that severely lessens their chance of ever coming back out of one. Sometimes people who recover may end up with major or minor disabilities as well, to include speech impediments, mental retardation, or problem coordinating body movements. Medically induced comas, meanwhile, are used when patients are at high risk of brain injury, either due to physical trauma, drug overdoses, or diseases. The purpose is to protect and control the pressure dynamics of the brain, as during injury or disease, the brain can swell up and push against the skull, which can starve some parts of the brain of oxygen. A medically induced coma reduces the electrical activity and slows down the brain's metabolism, minimizing swelling and inflammation. There are several different types of comas, and they each differ from each other. A vegetative state means that a person's body can make physical movements such as grunts or yawns, but has no reaction to actual stimuli. The movements are purely involuntary, and sadly, for loved ones, seeing the body of someone you care about suddenly yawn can induce false hope. The truth is, the brain remains shut down and operating only at the most basic levels. Catatonia, on the other hand, is a complete lack of any movement or response of any kind. This is exactly as it sounds, and often catatonic patients require help from machines to breathe and possibly even pump the heart. Brain death means that the higher brain functions are completely destroyed, and the brain only carries out autonomic functions such as breathing and swallowing, which are hardwired into our brain's programming. A brain-dead person has in effect no chance for recovery, and typically brain death results from extreme physical trauma or severe illness. A stupor is technically not a form of coma, but is sometimes referred to as one. This is a case of one being able to be awakened, but only with considerable effort. People in stupors can often fall right back into a deep unconsciousness, but more often than not will recover on their own. The danger is if they dip so deep into unconsciousness that their autonomic functions are impaired. While in a coma, your brain shows zero awareness or cognitive processing and is completely unable to respond to outside stimuli. It is in effect as if the brain has been completely turned off or is being rebooted like a computer. Except for in the most severe cases, the body will continue to breathe and the heart will continue to pump. And if you block the airway, patients can even cough as the body attempts to recover airflow. But that's about it, as the brain seems to be unable to communicate through the brainstem and the cerebrum, which controls cognitive consciousness through a process called the reticular activating system. Any doctor will admit that there's a great deal we simply don't know about the coma state. And in 2013, doctors treating an epileptic man in a coma were puzzled to find brain activity in the hippocampus. These ridges on the floor of each lateral ventricle of the brain are thought to be the center for emotion, memory, and the autonomic nervous system, meaning it's quite possible that the unconscious person was experiencing memories but little else. The doctors replicated their findings in cats, which were placed under general anesthetic, and the knowledge they gleaned may help make some comas reversible. While they don't believe that this means a coma patient with like this type of mental activity or any other has any sort of awareness or ability to communicate about their condition, it is strong evidence for the fact that the brain does in fact take actions to try and repair or protect itself while in a comatose state. The rest of the body typically remains unaffected by the coma state though, with functions such as breathing and heart beating being so hardwired into our passive nervous system that we do these things literally without thought. People in a coma state though will require IVs, which they are fed through, and kept hydrated, which are intubated with breathing tubes to maintain a clear airway, though some coma patients do retain the reflexes to swallow. The most common issue facing coma patients though is muscle atrophy, which comes from simply not using your muscles for prolonged periods of time. You don't need to be in a coma for this to happen though. If you've ever been a couch potato for a few weeks at a time, then you've likely experienced the severe weakness of muscles that have atrophied from a lack of exercise. Even just getting up for a walk one day can keep your muscles from wasting away. Bed sores are another serious concern for coma patients, also known as pressure ulcers. These are common for people who are bedridden or immobile, or perhaps unable to sense pain. These happen on areas of the skin that are under pressure from lying in bed, sitting down, or wearing a tight cast for a very long time. They develop when the blood supply to the skin is cut off for more than 2 to 3 hours, and as the skin dies, the bed sore starts as a red, painful area which will eventually turn purple. If not treated, the skin will split open and the area runs the risk of infection. They can also become very deep if undetected or untreated, extending into the muscle or even the bone, and they're very slow to heal. Sometimes bed sores can take years to heal and may require surgery. The most common places bed sores form are on the buttocks area, the heels of the feet, shoulder blades, back of the head, and backs and sides of the knees. If left untreated, they can grow grotesquely large. If you have the stomach for it, go ahead and do a Google image search for untreated bed sores. We did, and we deeply regret it. The good news about comas is that despite what medical dramas may tell you, most people recover within a few weeks to at least some level of their previous mental capacity. However, new research and techniques is continually improving our knowledge of comas and how to treat them. And in 2017, a 35-year-old man who'd been in a vegetative state since he was 20 was entered into a state doctors call minimal consciousness by stimulating the vagus nerve. This is one of the largest nerves in the body and goes directly to the heart, lungs, upper digestive tract, and other organs. While not awake, doctors were able to have him follow objects with his eyes and even prompted looks of surprise on his face, though sadly he was unable to talk or show any sort of higher brain function. Doctors warn though that while it's a big step forward, it's far from a conclusive one, because comas are as radically different from each other as those who suffer them, and what works on one individual may sadly not work on others. We've all heard stories of far-off primitive tribes hurling virgins into the mouth of a fiery volcano in their attempt to appease some particularly capricious god. What is that unfortunate girl's fate though as she falls to her fiery death? What's it like to die inside of a burning pit of lava and sulfur? Hello and welcome to another episode of the Infographic Show. Today we're taking a look at what happens to your body when you fall into a volcano. Falling into a volcano is not going to be a pleasant fate for anyone. Yet in 2007, a Maasai porter fell into the rim of an active volcano and managed to survive, albeit with some burns. Fortunately for that porter, the reason he survived is that the particular volcano he fell into has what's known as nitrocarbonatite lava, which is rich in sodium and potassium carbonate minerals, and nirerite, which is a unique combination that makes the lava cool very quickly when coming in contact with the air. This lava burns at around 510 degrees Celsius, or half the temperature of normal lava, and because the porter fell near the lava and not directly on it, he was able to survive. But what happens to our sacrificed version as she's hurled into a fiery mouth of doom, like an unwitting golem trying to save his precious? First, it's likely that as she falls through the air, she'll quickly suffocate from the noxious gases produced by the volcano. If not immediately suffocated, however, she'll likely completely sear her lungs as she inhales the superheated gas amidst the desperate screaming. With lungs burnt to a crisp and noxious gas coursing through her bloodstream, our sacrificed version will be near death already before even hitting the lava below. Depending on the type of volcano and the shape of the rim she's hurled into, her body will next likely burst into flames as she approaches the lava, but before she physically hits it. That's because radiant heat can superheat the air above and around the volcano mouth, making it reach temperatures so high that human flesh immediately ignites. Just seconds after being hurled into the mouth of the volcano, our sacrificed version has turned into a fiery human comet, though the worst is unfortunately still to come. Despite what you've seen in the movies, most lava is incredibly incredibly dense, anywhere from 2 to 3 times as dense as water. This is, after all, liquid rock we're talking about. That means that a human body is going to float on its surface, and because lava is also anywhere from thousands to millions of times more viscous than water, a human body impacting the surface is unlikely to deform it enough to sink beneath the surface. Our Virgin, if she's miraculously still alive, is then going to impact the surface of the lava with so much force that she'll break most bones in her body and remain stuck on the surface. Although variations in lava and temperatures across different volcanoes may possibly see her sink a few inches below. If she hadn't burst into flames from the radiant heat during her fall, she certainly will now, as she rests on the lava itself. With temperatures reaching up to 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, she will immediately burst into flames hot enough to reduce her body to ash within seconds. For anyone hoping to recover any remains for a proper burial, there'll be nothing left but ash floating in the wind to collect. Any metal filings, jewelry, or medical implants will also be incinerated, although a titanium medical implant may possibly survive, given titanium's melting point of 3034 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you hurled your aging Aunt May into the mouth of a volcano, you might have her hip implant left to remember her by. It's clear after our investigation that movies like Terminator 2 and Lord of the Rings lied to us. A fall into a fiery volcano won't mean a dramatic emotional goodbye, but rather result in an instant fireball and a smattering of ashes moments later, with just your bones burning for a minute or so after that.
Nothing's more relaxing than a long soak in warm water following a tough day at the office. Foam up some bubble baths, select a favorite playlist, and simply let the hot water massage away all those fears and woes. But what would happen if we simply stayed put right there in the bathtub and didn't budge? Is there a period of time when winding down gets dangerous? How long is too long when it comes to taking a bath? Today we'll find out, in this episode of the Infographic Show, what would happen to your body if you lived in the bathtub. First up, let's note with caution that heat and water aren't always our best bedfellows. In 2010, at the World Sauna Championships, yes, such a tournament does exist, one of the finalists, Vladimir Ladyshentsy, died tragically of burns while competing with veteran rival Timo Kakkonen. The temperature and the duration aren't the worst parts. It's the humidity with 0.5 liters of water tossed on the hot stones every 30 seconds, said fellow Finnish sauna champion competitor after the event. While no record seems to exist for length of time inside a bathtub, we do know that staying in the tub for more than a day would certainly make you wrinkly. Most people think that this wrinkly condition is because the body is simply absorbing too much water, but this is not really the case. The wrinkly skin phenomenon is actually our body trying to find a way to improve a grip in these new slippery aquatic conditions. In 2002, Tim Yarrow spent 10 days submerged in a small tank of water in a Johannesburg shopping mall. Yarrow beat a previous world record set in 1986 and had to sleep, eat, and even use the bathroom all underwater. After the ordeal, Yarrow had hands that looked like they belonged to a 200-year-old, and images of his wrinkly record-breaking hands subsequently went viral on the internet. Jerry Hall from Tennessee set the world record for the longest scuba dive, spending more than 6 days living on a platform 15 feet below the surface of South Halston Lake. He clocked up a total of 145 hours underwater, and when he finally surfaced, his hands and feet were extremely shriveled. "I got cold, and I don't like to be cold," Hall said when back ashore. "I'm hungry too, I'm ready to eat," he added. Hall wasn't short for entertainment, as he had an underwater TV where he watched his favorite movies including Planet of the Apes, True Grit, and Fast and Furious. He also listened to music and played checkers with visiting divers. In China, the government has been accused of taking political prisoners and leaving them submerged in water in a practice known as Chinese water torture. This Chinese water torture renders the victims unable to stand or have use of their limbs after immersion in water for a period of just a few days, suggesting once again that spending too much time in the bathtub might not be an altogether great idea. But just what do we know of the science behind the dangers of staying in the bathtub long after the cows have come home? Dr. Fromowitz spoke with the Dig editorial team in an article on the subject. In essence, prolonged immersion in water supersaturates the skin and leads to skin breakdown, he said. You will literally waste away hanging out in the tub. But this would all take a little time. To be fair, you would have about 2 days in the bathtub before you'd form vesicles. That's bubbles between the layers of skin, and following the onset of vesicles, your skin would slowly begin to separate until it began to actually peel away from itself like that of a banana. While the skin is peeling away, you would become subject to infection not just from that 2-day-old water that by this point would have become a tepid stew of your own porous excretions, but also from the air around. After maybe a week, you'd be in a state of infection, peeling, bleeding, and you might be dead. If not from the infections and sores brought on by the inevitable exposure, then from blood clots that have built up and are preventing oxygen from flowing through the body, leaving you in no wonder as to why the Chinese use this method for torture. So be careful while you bathe and try to cut that me time down to an hour at the most, as it is certainly true in this case that one can have too much of a good thing when it comes to laying in the tub.
A woman sitting in her apartment watching TV when she smells something that puts her off her macaroni and cheese dinner. She can't quite work out what the smell is, but the first two things that come to mind are rotten eggs and rotten cabbage. She's tired, so she goes to bed. But when she wakes up the next morning, that awful smell is even stronger. The stink is so bad that she gags. It feels as if somewhere in the house rats are decaying in one big heap. Then she notices that the smell seems to be coming from the apartment next door. That's enough to make her call the cops, even though the young guy who lives next door looks healthy and nowhere near his expiration date. When the cops enter that apartment, they too gag when they see the bloated corpse in front of them. Let's now go back in time. That guy that died was named Jack. His neighbor was right about him regarding her assumption that he was fit and healthy. His downfall was the fact that he worked out too much. Jack had injured himself and he had to take very strong pain medications following an ambitious attempt to clean and jerk much more than his own body weight. This was Jack's downfall because those medications brought on severe and chronic constipation. Jack put up with it as best he could, but over time his large bowel extended because of such a large buildup of feces. This led to compression in his chest cavity, and that resulted in him dying from sudden cardiac arrest. We know this because a pathologist performed an autopsy on him. We'll soon get back to that autopsy, but first, let's have a look at Jack's last gasp of air in this world. When Jack's heart failed him, what happened next was his brain didn't receive the blood flow it needed to function. He passed out, and after a few minutes, something called global cerebral ischemia happened. That's the term used for when the entire brain isn't getting any blood flow. Then Jack experienced something called brain death. He checked out and there was no coming back. He jerked around a bit, but that was just the last bit of brain activity performing its last dance. Now it gets messy. What happened next is Jack's body began the first phase of its post-death performance. This is known as primary flaccidity, and it basically means that all his muscles relaxed. At this point, his jaw dropped open by itself. Around the same time, that coffee he'd drunk in the morning bloomed at the front of his pants in the form of urine. As for that backed up feces he'd never been able to eject, that left his sphincter and made a big mess on the couch where he was sitting in his underwear. Jack then started to turn a shade of white, which is something in the death business they call pallor mortis. It's the process of the blood draining from the veins. This usually happens at around the 20-minute mark. Next up for Jack was the stage known as algor mortis, which is when the body starts to cool down. The human body is quite the toasty environment and usually has a temperature reading of anywhere from 97 degrees Fahrenheit to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. When someone is dead, that temperature will drop and level out at the temperature of the surroundings. Jack left his window open, so it was chilly in the room. This actually slowed down his decomposition, but it also opened a door to insects, who saw Jack as an ideal host for their eggs. What happens around that time is blood starts to pool where it can. With Jack's heart not pumping blood around his body, it's gravity that rules blood flow. In Jack's case, he was lying face down, so the blood started to pool as gravity pulled it down. This process, called livor mortis, starts at only about 20 minutes, but those purple patches on the body usually start to form at around the 2-hour mark. They become more pronounced as time goes on. Jack sat like this for a while, and then after about 4 hours, his muscles started to get very rigid, and he started to look pretty damn scary. This is the part of the process called rigor mortis. It's basically due to biochemical changes in the body. Jack's mouth was all twisted. He looked like someone who died after seeing a ghost. But it's actually a myth that people die with expressions of fear on their faces. The weird, sometimes pained expression is just the body going through the rigor mortis process. That process starts with the eyelids, hence those scary open eyes you see on dead people. It moves all the way down the body until it reaches the toes. Jack's body was extremely stiff at the 12-hour mark, at which point it would have been hard to move his limbs around. He remained looking like a statue for a good 2 days, which is quite normal. After that, his body started decaying some more, and the stiffness gave way to another relaxation stage known as secondary flaccidity. It's at this stage that the skin starts to shrink a bit. And if you'd seen Jack at this point, you might have thought his hair and nails were growing. That wasn't happening, it was just his skin receding. Okay, so Jack's been dead over 2 days now. He's pooped his pants, he's relaxed, and he's stiffened, and then he's relaxed again. Now it's time for the massacre, what some people call the cannibalization of the body. It depends on the temperature, but in general, people will start to show the signs of decomposition after around 3 days. People start decomposing pretty much as soon as they die, but it usually takes a few days for that decomposition to start making the dead look very dead. You see, Jack's body used to be maintained when it was a living organism, but when Jack died, his immune system no longer worked, and all that bacteria in his gut and elsewhere were free to explore his body. You could say that Jack started eating himself. Protein started decomposing, and all that bacteria started to digest his body. This stage of decomposition just made Jack turn a shade of green at the beginning, but it soon started to make him look pretty ugly and smell really bad. After about 5 days, Jack started to bloat and blisters formed at various points on his body. What was happening is he was fermenting, and that's because the feeding bacteria was creating gases in the body. It's generally what happens when you ferment stuff, including the human body. It's why a dead body sometimes emits a foul stench through its mouth. That gas has got to go somewhere. If you want to know why dead bodies smell so bad, you need to know what gases are emitted from the corpse. One called cadaverine is renowned for having the malodor of rotten fish. Putrescine also has notes of dead fish. Scatole smells like poo. Hydrogen sulfide smells like rotten eggs. Dimethyl disulfide smells like acrid garlic mixed with dead fish. And methane thiol has the distinct smell of rotten cabbage. Altogether, this medley of gases makes dead people not the best folks to have around as housemates. After around 12 days, parts of Jack's body were turning black and those terrible smells were worsening. This is about the time that his neighbor first noticed the stench. What the cops found at the scene was what's known as an unattended death. These can be viewed as suspicious deaths, so the first thing law enforcement wanted to know is if natural causes were to blame. Only around 5% of deaths in the US require an autopsy, and Jack was one of those. The medical examiner received Jack's body along with notes written by people who'd seen him in his apartment. The note said he was sitting on the couch and that there was nothing at the scene that suggested foul play or suicide. The pathologist also had information about Jack's medical history, so he saw that Jack had been prescribed strong painkillers. This was a big deal, of course. The examiner then got to work, externally going over the body from head to toe to look for anything that could suggest the cause of death. There was nothing remarkable to see there, so the examiner opened Jack up after cutting him from his sternum to his pubic bone. Jack was still a little bloated, so the examiner had to take a step back when some gas escaped from the body. Once he cut through the skin, fat, and muscles, the examiner opened Jack's rib cage. He actually used a pair of shears to do this, a tool not unlike ordinary garden shears. Now that he has the keys to the kingdom, he could start removing Jack's organs. The first removal saw Jack's heart, lungs, throat, and tongue go. Then he took out the stomach, liver, and the pancreas, followed by the bladder, bowels, and reproductive organs. The tricky bit can be removing the tongue without causing a scar that will upset the grieving family and friends. But every medical examiner knows how to get to the tongue without making a visible scar someone will see later. So now Jack's hardly himself at all as the examiner looks at, weighs, and slices open various organs. He's pretty much looking for anything out of the ordinary, and in Jack's case it was pretty obvious what had happened. Once the cause of death was determined, Jack's organs were put back into his body and he was sewn up. The reconstruction job doesn't mean everything goes back perfectly into place, far from it. But an examiner will put the organs close to where they came from. In some cases, the organs may be kept for research, or they might be cremated if the family gives their consent. All we can say is that Jack got his back. The examiner signed the death certificate and completed the form so Jack could be buried. It must be said that because Jack had spent quite a lot of time decomposing on the couch, he looked pretty rough, even for a corpse. Now we come to the funeral home where Jack will spend a little bit of time before his big day. The first thing that happened there was the spa treatment. This consisted of washing the body and making sure all his limbs were lying in the right place. Jack didn't need much limb massaging because the rigor mortis stage had already passed. His eyelids were then closed with glue and his jaw was wired shut. After a little bit more tinkering with his mouth, he was made to look as though he was resting in peace. Next up was the embalmment, which consisted of removing Jack's blood and pumping him full of chemicals to preserve his body. After that, Jack's abdomen was drained, as was his chest cavity, and once that happened, the embalming chemicals were pumped in. The last thing was to make Jack look presentable to those who'd see him in his open casket. So makeup was used to give him more of a glow than he had when he went into the funeral home. His hair was styled, his nasal hair cropped, and his nails were cut. He was then dressed and placed in a coffin ready for the big send-off. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and Jack was in the ground. What next? The answer is a lot of waiting. If Jack had just been left to rot above ground in the open air, things would have been different. There, he would have been feasted on by insects, and within a matter of weeks, he would have very likely become a liquefied mess. It's a different story 6 feet under, embalmed and housed in a wooden box. How a person will decompose depends on a lot of factors. Those factors include what kind of coffin someone's sealed in, the environment in which the coffin is placed, and also the body of the person that has died. After just a few weeks underground, Jack no longer had any kind of greenish complexion, and instead, he had a dark brown tint to his skin. That nice suit he wore to his own funeral was hanging off him after a few months, and once a year had passed, there wasn't much of it left. This doesn't mean that the suit was badly made, but that the suit was being degraded by the fluids coming out of Jack. 10 years have now passed, and Jack is now on his way to becoming human soup, which isn't a very good look for him. Things could have been very different. Some bodies have been exhumed after many years and they didn't look too different from when they were buried. You just don't know what you're gonna get when you open a coffin that's been dug up. For instance, if the body is buried in very dry conditions, it could mummify, which is probably a nice outcome if you're an exhumer by trade. It might take years, but there's no getting away from the fact that one day we will all become a skeleton if we're not specially preserved. So that's the story of Unlucky Jack. But it's also partly the story of most people on this planet. We all have the same ticket for the same destination, although none of us know when our bus is due. The bottom of the sea, Davy Jones's locker, a notoriously unhealthy place for a human being to find themselves. Yet for thousands of sailors and aviators throughout history, that's exactly where their dead remains have ended up. While on land we know that bacteria and insects help break down corpses, what happens when you die at sea? Hello and welcome to another episode of the Infographic Show. Today we're taking a look at what happens to your body at the bottom of the sea. If you drown out at sea, there's actually little chance of you reaching the bottom. The human body is naturally buoyant enough that the currents and waves can keep a corpse within the upper layers of the ocean for a long amount of time. This can attract scavengers such as sharks who will feed on a corpse, specifically if you're involved in a ship sinking or a plane crash whose low-frequency sound waves can travel for hundreds of miles and alert sharks to the incoming human buffet. If your corpse manages to sink, however, it may avoid predation altogether given that it sinks quickly enough. The open ocean is split into two biomes with a great void of water in between the two that is largely bereft of life. That's the upper surface, which has most of the life we're well acquainted with, such as dolphins, sharks, and whales. And then the ocean floor, full of crabs, shrimp, and creatures directly from H.R. Giger's worst nightmares. For a few hundred meters below and above these two biomes, life flourishes, but the space in between is often largely free of advanced life forms. So if your body manages to sink fast enough that it makes it past the upper biome, you'll hit the bottom intact. But what happens then? As most people know, the bottom of the ocean is very cold. Very, very cold, reaching temperatures between 0 and 3 degrees Celsius. That's in contrast to temperatures as warm as 36 degrees Celsius in the Persian Gulf. While you've likely been taught that water freezes at these temperatures and thus would think that your body would turn into an ice cube, the incredible pressures at those depths actually compacts the salt in the seawater, which lowers its freezing point. That pressure also physically prevents seawater from expanding and freezing into a solid, so you won't be an ice cube, just a very cold, salty corpse. As you hit the bottom of the ocean, the first thing you're going to do is attract the attention of lycaean acid amphipods, tiny shrimp-like creatures that are sort of like the flies and other insects of the deep ocean world. These tiny crustaceans have voracious appetites, and like a horde of starving piranhas, will quickly set upon your corpse. But wait, because it gets worse. These tiny guys don't have jaws strong enough to puncture human skin, which means they'll work their way inside you and start consuming you from the inside out. They find access to a corpse through the eyes, which can be easily consumed by the little guys, nose, mouth, any open wounds, and, well, you're behind. Once they work their way inside, they immediately attack the soft organs and start eating their way out to the skin. These amphipods will completely swarm your body, covering every square inch as they try to find their way to your soft, gooey center. In just a matter of days, between 3 and 4, they will have reduced you to a hollow shell, leaving behind only bone and tough ligaments and cartilage. Satisfied and having devoured everything they're capable of, they'll leave you behind and search for other prey, only to leave room for larger prawns, such as Pandalis platyceros to move in. These guys are the finishers and come in to nibble on any remaining tough tissues, leaving nothing but perfectly bleached bones after just 10 days. This is only in highly oxygenated waters though, such as those found near continental shelves or with the right ocean currents. In less oxygenated waters, there's less life at the bottom of the ocean, meaning your corpse can potentially remain in decent condition for a month or more. However, if you sink to the bottom within 100 miles or so from shore, you could expect that there'll be nothing left to recover of you, except some perfectly bleached bones after just a week. Deep ocean sharks may occasionally swing by and take bites out of you, but largely you'll be consumed and devoured by tiny little shrimp, horrifically eaten from the inside out. And that's why our favorite seafood is shrimp. You have to eat them before they eat you. Ah, the ocean. The sun, the sand, and of course, the surf. There really is nothing more relaxing than floating in the ocean. It's so relaxing, in fact, that it's tempting to want to stay floating there forever. But is that possible? What would happen to your body if you lived in the ocean? First of all, it's unlikely you'd survive even a few hours before hypothermia kicked in. Very few parts of the ocean maintain surface temperatures in excess of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Anything less, and you're at risk of hypothermia. Hypothermia happens when your core body temperature drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and cold water accelerates heat loss by up to 25%. Within a few minutes, you'd begin to experience symptoms like shivering, numbness in your limbs, and pain from the cold. You'll know that you're really in trouble though when the shivering stops. This means that you're in the next, more severe stage of hypothermia. You'd begin to feel confused, your muscles would become rigid, and you'd slip into unconsciousness. But before you pass out, you might actually experience a sudden rush of warmth as the muscles constricting your blood vessels give out, and the last warm blood in your body rushes from your core to your extremities. Assuming you could find a pocket of tropical paradise warm enough to ward off hypothermia, you'd have plenty of other issues to worry about. Your immediate problem would be the sun and heat exposure. In extremely hot environments, heat stroke can set in within hours, and the sun reflecting off the water all around you can make things even more unbearable. The first signs of heat stroke are excessive thirst, sweating, nausea, and muscle cramps. Once you actually stop sweating and stop feeling thirsty, you'll know you're in real trouble. Unless you can stay hydrated, you're doomed. And don't even think about drinking the salty ocean water. We'll tell you all the grisly reasons why you don't want to do that in a minute. But first, let's talk about another danger of living in the ocean. If you aren't lucky enough to have a life jacket or be standing in chin-deep water, exhaustion will get you long before the elements become a problem. Experts all agree that treading water is the best way to conserve energy and stay afloat. But even the strongest swimmers can only sustain continuous treading water for a matter of hours. Even if you can stand on the bottom, a lack of sleep, not to mention the stress of your situation, can lead to delirium, panic, and even death. Even if you're able to float or stand, continuous submersion in water could cause your muscles to break down within a few days, and rhabdomyolysis, called rhabdo for short, would set in. Rhabdo is usually caused by excessive exercise, but long periods of immobility can also cause it. After a few days of floating, your muscles would become weak and painfully sore, and you'd have trouble walking if you were able to make it to dry land. As your muscles break down, they release proteins and electrolytes into your bloodstream, leading to kidney failure and, if left untreated, death. With all of those brutal effects of living in the ocean, it's no wonder that the Chinese are rumored to have used water immersion as a form of torture. Both heat and hypothermia could have contributed to the 1998 deaths of Tom and Eileen Lonergan, two scuba divers who were left behind by their diving party off the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Officials believed they survived their first night stranded in the open ocean before succumbing to exhaustion or the elements. Rescuers found a message from them scrawled on an underwater diving slate 100 miles from where they were last known to be. On top of exposure to the elements, the Lonergans also might have had to contend with those other horrific results of long-term submersion in the ocean. Anyone who's stayed in the bath for a little too long is familiar with the icky, pruny feeling of wrinkling skin. Believe it or not, this wrinkling in our skin is its attempt to adapt to life underwater. Constricting blood vessels in our skin create a pattern of wrinkles that actually improves our ability to grip wet objects underwater. After a few days, though, continuous submersion in water will start to break down your skin. Your skin would swell and soften, and open sores would begin to form all over your body. Even if the water you were in was perfectly sterile, which the ocean most definitely is not, the pores on your own skin are enough to cause infection. As your sores are exposed to debris and pathogens in the water, they'd continue to ooze and fester and begin to attract predators. Sharks are a very real danger to your festering body in the ocean. In 1945, more than 900 American sailors found themselves adrift in the ocean after their ship was hit by a Japanese torpedo and sank. Drawn by the sound of the explosion, the thrashing of bodies, and blood in the water, the survivors were soon set upon by a school of aggressive oceanic white-tipped sharks. After 4 days of battling exposure, hunger, and thirst while being preyed upon by sharks, the remaining 300 survivors were rescued. Of the nearly 600 who died, at least 150 of them were thought to be victims of shark attacks. Sharks aside, there's plenty of other smaller creatures to worry about. From crabs to turtles to even flesh-eating sea lice, there are plenty of sea creatures that would consider your decomposing body a tasty treat. The good news is you probably wouldn't live long enough to have to worry about most of those hazards. In all likelihood, you wouldn't survive more than 3 to 5 days in the ocean before dehydration got the better of you. While you can survive weeks without food, you'll only last a few days without water. Your body loses water in many ways, by sweating, through your urine and feces, even through breathing. And don't forget through your tears. You'll definitely be shedding a few of those by that point. As your body temperature rises and your organs begin to shut down, you'll experience dry mouth, hallucination, and a lack of urine. The final stage of dehydration is shock. Your skin would turn blue-gray in color and feel cold to the touch due to a severe drop in blood pressure, before your organs finally shut down and you die. You may be thinking, what's the problem? I'm surrounded by water. Salty ocean water might help keep us afloat, but it does nothing for our thirst. In fact, it can be deadly. While your body does need some salt to function, hello electrolytes, seawater is way too salty and actually speeds up dehydration. To rid your body of the excess salt, your kidneys will produce more urine than you drink, quickly depleting your body of what little water it has, hastening your death by dehydration. However, just knowing that salt water is deadly might not be enough to save you. Many a person stranded at sea has become delirious with thirst and couldn't stop themselves from drinking the salty water, causing their tongue to swell and their mouth to foam as they succumb to salt poisoning. In the age of rising sea levels due to global warming, our body's ability or lack thereof to live in the ocean is not very comforting. So what would it take for you to be able to survive in the ocean? What evolutions would humans need to undergo to adapt to aquatic life? And how close are we to making that a reality? If future humans need to learn to adapt to aquatic life, they can take inspiration from aquatic tribes living around the world today. Take, for example, the Bajau peoples of Indonesia. Nicknamed sea gypsies because of their nomadic seafaring lifestyle, the Bajau are renowned for their impressive freediving skills, which allow them to catch fish in waters up to 200 feet deep. Their underwater prowess is possible due to their ability to hold their breath for long periods of time, up to 13 minutes for some of the best divers. Scientists have recently discovered that the Bajau people have actually evolved to have larger than average spleens, which let them use oxygen more efficiently and stay underwater for longer periods. For most of us with normal-sized spleens, scuba diving is the closest we can get to being Aquaman or Aquawoman. In July 2016, Turkish scuba diver Cem Karabay set the world record for the longest time spent underwater in open water, where he spent almost 6 days underwater in the ocean near Cyprus. He lived on a specially built underwater platform and passed the time underwater by playing chess and football with his support team, or watching TV on his underwater screen. Water pressure is another huge problem for our fragile human bodies. Even the minimal pressures at surface levels would cause circulation and breathing problems after prolonged submersion in water. Water pressure can cause our eardrums to burst, and at only 30 meters deep, the pressure will compress your lungs to half their normal volume. Even with proper training and equipment, we're still vulnerable to rapid changes in water pressure. One of the most well-known consequences of exposure to high pressure is decompression sickness, or the bends, every scuba diver's nemesis. When you scuba dive with compressed air, your tank is filled with a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen. Your body uses up the oxygen, but the nitrogen remains in your bloodstream. If a diver returns to shallower, lower pressure water too quickly, the nitrogen can't clear from the bloodstream and instead forms bubbles inside the veins. Think of a can of soda when you open it. As you decrease the pressure inside the can, the gases are released as bubbles. This is exactly what happens to the nitrogen in your bloodstream during decompression sickness, leading to symptoms like dizziness, headache, numbness, and weakness in the arms and legs, and joint pain. Of course, the most important part of your scuba gear is your oxygen tank and breathing apparatus. This is because, unfortunately, humans can't breathe underwater. While some exceptional humans have trained themselves for years to be able to hold their breath for impressive lengths of time, even they're unable to truly breathe underwater. In July 2018, Russian freediver Alexei Molchanov beat his own record and completed the deepest self-propelled dive in history when he swam to a depth of 426 feet, all while holding his breath for more than 2.5 minutes. Holding our breath for even a few minutes is simply out of reach for most of us. But just because our bodies are not designed to breathe underwater doesn't mean science isn't trying to solve that problem. Humans may not be able to sprout gills, but scientists in Japan are working on an artificial gill system that will allow humans to survive underwater for extended periods. The amphibio system was inspired by a type of diving spider that has hydrophobic skin that acts like gills by creating a bubble of air around the spider's body. The amphibio system is made from a hydrophobic 3D printable material, and the system includes a vest covered with air bladders that extracts oxygen from the water and feeds it into the attached face mask. It's still in the concept stage, but early tests are definitely impressive. Liquid breathing is another potential avenue that scientists are exploring for giving humans the ability to live underwater. The idea of humans getting oxygen directly from the water might seem far-fetched, but it's actually already a proven medical treatment for severe pulmonary trauma and even premature babies. In these cases, the patient's lungs are filled with a perfluorocarbon, an oxygen-enriched fluid that their lungs are able to draw oxygen from. This one might sound like something right out of science fiction novels or a wellness fair, but scientists in Denmark have recently developed a crystal-like substance that can aid humans in breathing underwater. The substance, which includes cobalt crystal, can bind with and absorb oxygen from the air or the water, and that oxygen can be released by applying a little heat. Who knows, someday soon divers may be trading in their air tanks for a mouthful of crystals. And there's plenty to worry about when it comes to living in the water, and that includes routine business like, well, doing our business. When Tim Yarrow set the world record for the longest time spent underwater in 2002, he had to find a way to eat and, yes, eliminate in his aquatic environment. Yarrow spent a week and a half submerged in a tank of water in a mall in South Africa, and for those 10 days he ate all of his meals through a tube. His waste was taken care of by a catheter. If the idea of a catheter makes you uncomfortable, don't worry. If humans truly lived in the ocean, we'd just do as the fish do and go on the go. But we would need to evolve to separate our respiratory system from our digestive system so that we could eat in the ocean without inhaling the water. Some scientists believe that humans are uniquely suited to adapt to an aquatic lifestyle because we evolved from aquatic apes, although the theory has been largely dismissed by the scientific community. It would take at least 1,000 years of evolution for human bodies to adapt to living in the ocean, and if we did, the likely results would more than likely resemble seals than mermaids. Future aquatic humans might have extra body fat and body hair to help insulate them in cold ocean waters, and they might have longer limbs and webbed hands and feet to make swimming easier. To adapt to life underwater, humans would need to develop gills or some other method of breathing underwater, and they may develop cat-like eyes to help them see better in the darkness of the ocean. That's not exactly the Aquaman physique we had in mind. Space, the final frontier. And for anyone unfortunate enough to be sucked out an airlock without a spacesuit, it will definitely be the fatal frontier. It's an old Hollywood trope. Humans inside a flimsy spacecraft have an accident of some type, and now the hull's been breached and everyone is about 2 seconds away from becoming human popsicles or having their eyeballs explode. But is that really what happens to you if you stepped out of a spacecraft unprotected? Hello and welcome to another episode of the Infographics Show. Today we're taking a look at what would happen to your body in space. The most obvious problem you're going to have if you're sucked out into space is a lack of oxygen. Space is a nearly perfect vacuum, meaning there's not much gas to breathe in, let alone breathable O2. So if you find yourself aboard some space disaster, then you clearly should hold your breath and try to claw your way to safety, right? Wrong. That would actually be almost instantly fatal for you. As we mentioned, space is an almost perfect vacuum. And if you tried to hold your breath, you would be pitting your own chest muscles against the strength of space itself. And that's a fight you're gonna lose. The oxygen in your lungs will immediately expand and rupture your lungs, being released into the circulatory system and ripped out of your chest, along with large parts of your now shredded lung tissues. So instead of holding your breath, you want to breathe out as completely as possible and make sure your lungs are empty. Don't worry, your brain will continue to remain conscious for about 15 seconds, and you can survive up to 2 minutes with little risk of permanent damage. With no atmospheric pressure squeezing down on your body, the next thing to happen will be the vaporization of water in your body. In a normal situation, water molecules are constantly being blown off, but by being repelled with their air molecules, the water remains in equilibrium with the air. Without any atmosphere, though, water will begin to evaporate throughout your entire body, causing you to start swelling like a naughty kid inside Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. You'll eventually swell to about twice normal size, but because human skin is incredibly elastic and durable, you won't burst like a giant meat balloon. If you get rescued at this point, you'll actually return to normal and you should be fine, though we wouldn't recommend it. If rescue isn't forthcoming though, then you're going to be in incredible amounts of pain. And if you were hoping to instantly black out due to the lack of blood pressure, then we got some bad news for you. Your circulatory system is so robust that it's able to keep your blood pressurized even in the vacuum of space. So as you swell up like a party balloon, you can look forward to retaining full consciousness as the blood keeps on pumping, at least until the oxygen stored in your blood runs out after 15 seconds. Moisture on the exterior of your body though, and in places like your eyes and tongue, will immediately begin to boil due to the lack of atmospheric pressure. Yet this isn't a hot type of boiling, but rather a very violent form of evaporation. So you won't cook yourself alive either. If you are ejected into space in direct line of sight of a star, then you can expect to receive an incredibly bad sunburn on whatever side of your body is facing that star, thanks to unfiltered solar radiation. Depending on how far you are from the star though, you might not receive enough heat to be seriously burnt. But if you went for a stroll outside the International Space Station's airlock with no spacesuit, you could expect a severe and very immediate sunburn. You'll likely also be bombarded by huge amounts of cosmic radiation, especially if you're outside the protective magnetosphere of a large planet. Our suggestion is to spin rapidly. That way you'll be crispy nice and evenly. We all know space is cold, roughly 2.7 Kelvin or negative 270 degrees Celsius or negative 455 degrees Fahrenheit. You'd probably expect that your corpse would then rapidly freeze without any protection, but actually, you could stay relatively warm for a pretty long amount of time. That's because your body and skin is a pretty excellent insulator. And because space is a vacuum, there's nothing to lose heat to via convection or conduction. Here on Earth, we're constantly surrounded by atmospheric gases, so when it gets cold, they're able to leach heat from our body and carry it away, making us cold. In space though, there's no medium to lose heat to, so your core body temperature would remain warm for a decent amount of time. Once you're dead though, well, you're not going to change much for a long time. On Earth, we decompose as we're eaten up by the bacteria inside of us, billions of tiny, hungry little life forms just waiting to eat you alive that keeps your body in constant check throughout your immune system. But once that immune system fails, those bacteria finally have their chance to turn you into a buffet, and they gorge themselves while rapidly procreating. Think about that next time you buy some probiotic yogurt. You're just making those little bacteria stronger, and they're patiently waiting for your immune system to slip up so they can eat you from the inside out. In space though, the extreme radiation and temperatures will kill that bacteria before it can consume much of your body, leaving your corpse perfectly preserved for millions and millions of years. If you're close to a star, you'll mummify, much like an ancient Egyptian. Only when aliens find you millions of years later, you'll actually be in a lot better shape than them. Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world above sea level, and one of the most dangerous and thrilling locations for adventurers. Climbing this mountain is the ultimate challenge for experienced mountaineers and daring rookies, the highest of the 7 summits. For those who accomplish this feat, usually with the help of hired trained Sherpas who know the challenging terrain inside and out, glory among their fellow mountaineers awaits. But many of these climbers never make it off. Mount Everest isn't just one of the most challenging mountains in the world to climb, it's one of the most dangerous. The combination of the extreme height, the brutal weather conditions, and the unpredictable terrain mean that many of the climbers wind up breathing their last on the mountain. In total, at least 304 climbers are known to have perished on Mount Everest between 1922 and the current day, and who knows how many died before records were being kept. So how is Everest claiming its victims? It doesn't take a lot to die at 26,000 feet above sea level, as the atmospheric pressure is brutal and the oxygen levels are punishingly low. Strenuous activity at that height can be fatal. There's a reason this area is known as the death zone. The body uses oxygen faster than it can replenish it, bodily functions deteriorate, and people pass out and die. And that's not taking into consideration the constant risk of falls, avalanches, ice collapses, exposure to the brutal cold and wind, or natural causes like cardiac arrest and strokes. But when people die on Everest, that's not the end of their story. If you're planning to climb Mount Everest, don't be surprised if you see a disturbing sight: a dead body lying on the path of your journey, still clothed in their mountaineering gear. This is because Mount Everest doesn't just have a few dead bodies still on the mountain, it has over 200. Many of the climbers are still permanent residents of the mountain. In fact, one has even become a landmark of sorts, known as Green Boots. The unfortunate man, believed to have been Indian climber Tsewang Paljor, has been on the mountain since 1996 when he died at a climbing expedition. So why has Mount Everest become the final resting place for so many people? Well, for one thing, it's really high. Every dead person on Mount Everest likely has people on the ground who would love to have their loved ones' remains brought down and be given a proper burial, but for many reasons it's just not feasible. Just as climbing Mount Everest is a massive undertaking, so is getting anyone down. Rescue missions are notoriously unpredictable and dangerous for the rescuers. While some people have hired teams to bring down their loved ones' bodies, the cost of such a mission can be around $70,000, far out of reach for many families. And one notorious mission to recover a body even cost 2 more lives in 1984 when the rescuers fell prey to the elements. Everest's destiny seems to be one of the world's biggest open-air graveyards. Normally, if bodies were left out in the open for any length of time, the place would become pretty much uninhabitable. The elements would lead to the decomposition of the body, causing a horrible smell and attracting parasites, scavengers, and swarms of flies. But Everest is a very different place. The average temperature on the mountain summit ranges from a chilly -4 Fahrenheit to a deadly -31 Fahrenheit. But one thing is consistent: it's well below freezing for the entire year. And that creates a unique climate for life and death. Everest isn't a hospitable place for living beings, as anything there for a long time will freeze solid. And that's exactly what will happen to all the dead on Everest. The bodies are frozen in place, largely preserved as they were when they died, save for the significant cellular damage from the cold. But while a body almost anywhere else would be little more than a skeleton after years in place, the Everest bodies, seen by climbers every year, are often reported as looking eerily similar to when they fell, given how little skin is left exposed in the climbing gear. This has led to some eerie encounters. In addition to the famous Green Boots who lies curled in a cave with his boots pointing toward new climbers, climbers never know exactly who they'll encounter on their trip. That's what awaited one climber, Lakpa Sherpa. She holds the record for most times reaching the summit for any woman, but in 2018 she saw a shocking 8 bodies during her climb. More disturbingly, one even looked alive, the hair on his frozen body blowing in the stiff Everest winds. But as the climbers keep coming to Everest, a problem is emerging. The pristine mountain climate of Mount Everest is quickly becoming littered not just with bodies but with the trash they and other climbers leave behind. A record number of climbers came to Everest as recently as 2019, with over 1,000 climbing permits being issued. And as they leave the mountain, they often don't leave it like they left it. Decades of climbing have left some areas of the mountain looking more like a dirty city street than a remote and pristine mountain. The China and Nepalese governments are stepping up in an effort to remove the trash, but accomplishing anything on Everest has its risks, and getting bodies down is an even bigger challenge. Not only are the bodies on Everest littering the mountains, many of them are in deeply remote locations. While many died of exposure or lack of oxygen and simply lay down to die in a cave or at the side of a path, others died more violently, including those who plummeted to their deaths in steep crevasses. That means some bodies might be wedged deep in a hidden location, impossible to see except for the next person who meets that unfortunate fate. But even more shockingly, some bodies aren't staying where they're supposed to be. No, we're not talking about reanimated frozen bodies on Everest, and the odds are good that the Yeti isn't coming out of his cave to steal some bodies. But nature is powerful up on top of Everest, and that power is enough to dislodge bodies from their final resting place. Gale force winds can easily pick up a human body of 150 pounds or so and move it to another location, and shifting glaciers can even move bodies into inaccessible locations or crush them behind massive ice blocks. Even the famous Green Boots was moved from his original location in 2014, making the morbid landmark much harder to spot. The mountain keeps a tight grip on those who rest there forever, and it's a tricky issue in more ways than one. There's a growing pressure to remove many of the bodies from Everest. Not only is the increasing number of bodies potentially becoming a hazard for climbers, but many of the families want their loved ones returned to them for closure. In addition, those who follow the traditional faith of the region, including many of the Sherpas, believe leaving the bodies on the mountain is disrespectful to the gods. And there are logistical difficulties as well. Bodies on Everest that stay in one place often freeze in place. Not only may they have become brittle over the time they've stayed there, but they may be challenging to even detach from the mountain. And the challenges in getting the bodies off the mountain are only starting. There are 2 primary ways to get a body off Everest. The first is expensive and risky, using helicopters similar to the ones used for high-altitude rescues. Pulling off a rescue near Everest summit is always risky, with the high winds posing a deadly challenge to even the most experienced rescue pilots. This is an expensive option, but a more affordable option exists: hiring an expedition to climb the mountain, locate the body, and carry it off the mountain using a rigging and sled-like device. This is a more affordable option to recover a body, but both options carry significant risks of adding more permanent residents to Mount Everest. So how does it get determined whether a body stays or goes? Most of the time it's decided by the grieving family, but this is a fraught decision that comes with great financial risk and risk to the life of the rescuer. That's why many climbers are actually settling the issue before they set foot on the mountain, by signing body disposal forms. If the worst happens on the mountain, they can choose to be left on the mountain to rest there, or to contract for the recovery efforts in advance. And if they do choose to have their body recovered, many opt for local cremation, which for European and American tourists will definitely cut down on the cost of getting their remains home. But now, a new wrinkle is turning this frozen graveyard into a more pressing concern. The world is getting warmer, and with it, many areas that were permanently covered in snow are becoming visible once again, including some areas of Mount Everest. Climbers are reporting that grim finds on the mountain are becoming increasingly common, with the snow melting in the warmer months and exposing long-buried bodies that may not be in great condition. Finding old bones is pretty common, and even hidden intact bodies are showing up. This may help bring closure to some families that lost their loved ones on the mountain, but it may also ruin Everest's natural beauty even more. And if the thick ice coating on the mountain continues to melt, it may make climbing the mountain much more difficult. That's why some countries are considering drastic steps. Nepal's tourism ministry has collected names of long-missing mountaineers and sent up large numbers of volunteers to collect trash and bodies from the mountain. Although collecting bodies above 21,000 feet is still a risky operation and rarely attempted, the higher areas of the mountain are likely to remain frozen for now. In addition, in 2021, they banned climbers from taking pictures of any climbers beyond their own group, which they hope will protect people's privacy and keep people from taking risky shots while climbing. But some advocates for the mountain are urging a more drastic step. 1,000 or so foreign climbers are expected to take on the mountain every spring during the peak climbing season, looking to join the more than 8,000 people who have reached the top since 1953. But countless more will fail along the way, some will die, and many of them will leave more trash behind them. While the Nepalese government charges a levy to each climber that raises money used to preserve the mountain, and many climbers use their mission to raise money for charity, more people are arguing if the ritual of climbing the mountain is doing more harm than good. They argue it might be time to close the summit to foreign tourists to keep it from getting despoiled and damaged more than it is. And of course, to keep Everest's collection of permanent residents, many frozen in time, from getting any larger. You're cooped up at home watching your favorite videos on the infographic show. You love the ones where that guy does crazy stunts and challenges. You can't believe the things he gets up to. You're watching the one where he spends 24 hours in the bathtub as his body gets more and more wrinkled and his body gets more sore from lying against the hard edge of the tub. Fortunately, his body doesn't suffer any real ill effects from the super long bath, aside from some oddly loose skin that'll fit back into place perfectly once the body dries out. You're bored without too much to do at home and you wonder, could you top this crazy stunt? You're not going to spend 2 or more days in the bath, so you instead think about what else you can take a bath in. What would it be like to take a 24-hour bath in soda? Would the sugary fizzy substance have a worse effect on your skin, or would it be safe? You're about to find out. You've got a large stockpile of your favorite cola at home and an empty bathtub. After pouring out most of your stash into the bathtub, your tub is filled near the top with a brown, bubbling liquid that doesn't look particularly inviting for bathing, but you're here in the name of science and you go in. When you first get in, you're surprised by a few things. The highly carbonated liquid has a bubbling, tingling sensation. This is going to make it hard to get comfortable because it's like a million little pokes every time a bubble bursts against your skin. It's not painful, but you can imagine this getting very old very quickly. The good news is the soda isn't going to stay carbonated forever, and when exposed to the open air, it'll eventually go flat. No one likes flat soda, but it'll make lying in this bath a lot more comfortable. You're glad you opened a few windows before this experiment because these bottles contain a lot of CO2, and you don't want to inhale all that in a closed space. The other thing that stands out is that the sugar content of the soda is very clear. You can feel a sticky sensation on your skin when you lift your hand out of the tub. And you imagine that when you get out of your extended soda bath, you're going to need another bath to get it all off. When you dip your hand back in, it feels like the sugar is getting washed off, but you know it's just picking up a new layer from the soda bath. You have to be careful of how you sit in the bath, because the more you sink into the tub, the more you're going to get that sticky feeling all over your body when you sit up. You've got a long time ahead of you in this bathtub, and staying comfortable is going to be a challenge. You start to wonder what you've gotten into. What do you really know about this substance you volunteered to sit in for a day? Coca-Cola is one of the most popular packaged beverages in the world, and most of its ingredients are familiar, those we know at least. It's one of the most closely guarded secrets in the world, and its main ingredients are carbonated water, sugar, either sucrose or high fructose corn syrup, phosphoric acid, and caramel color, plus natural flavorings. Those natural flavorings are where the big mystery comes in, as the secret flavorings are as tightly guarded as KFC's 11 herbs and spices. There's one flavoring you're pretty sure isn't in there anymore though, cocaine, which was originally included in small doses of extract from coca leaves when the formula was perfected in 1891. There are many other colas, but most have a similar formula with slightly different ingredients. As you sit in the bath and watch your skin get stickier and try to turn pruny, you're more worried about another ingredient you see on the label: phosphoric acid. The idea of sitting in a formula that contains acid for 24 hours is more than a little worrying. You're starting to get visions of dissolving in the bath in your head. The good news is that while phosphoric acid is a potent acid when in its pure form, it can cause burns on the skin or eye damage. It's harmless when diluted. When added to soda or jam, it's used to create a mild, tangy flavor in food. Back in the day of old-fashioned soda shops, sodas containing it were called phosphates. Phosphoric acid is also used to remove rust, but you're hoping it won't have the same effect on your skin. You've been in the bathtub for several hours now, and you're following the rules of the original video. You can only complete the challenge if you stay in the tub for the entire time without a break. The good news is you're fully equipped with technology, and your phone and computer are nearby. You can watch videos, order food, and keep busy. But you can't help but sneak a look at your hands and legs every once in a while. This is much longer than the average bath, and you can definitely see your feet and hands starting to get that loose texture that comes with sitting in the bath too long. Does your skin look a little darker from the caramel color sinking into your skin? You're not sure, but you think you can see a slight difference. It'll be much clearer after another few hours. The guy in the original video didn't suffer any long-term physical problems from sitting in the tub for a full day. Besides a sore back and some loose skin he had to be careful not to pull on, but he made it pretty clear that he wouldn't push it much further. There are risks to being constantly immersed in liquid with no break, as soldiers often find out. The most common injury from overexposure to water on the skin is called trench foot, for soldiers who spend days on end walking through wet, marshy climates in combat. With no break and no opportunity to take the boots off and air out their feet, their shoes trap the water and cause swelling, poor blood supply, and a terrible odor from the feet. If treated, the feet will return to normal within a few days. But if the condition is allowed to progress, it can result in blisters, sores, fungal infection, and even gangrene. The good news is this is most common when people are walking constantly in wet shoes. All you have to do is lie there, and you don't have to worry about any of that. Normally, you'd be busy in the bathtub scrubbing yourself clean and using soap and shampoo, but taking a bath in soda is enough of an experiment. You don't want to add more substances that muddy the experiment. Besides, you think scrubbing in sugary water confuses the point of a bath. It's been almost 8 hours now, and the water is almost completely flat. That makes it a little more comfortable, but the sticky feeling on your skin is getting more and more pronounced with each hour. It feels like you're coated in a thin, sticky slime of soda. The caramel color is definitely starting to seep into your skin. It's a potent color that's been used in the personal care industry for years as a way to dye hair, but being immersed in it for hours on end makes you wonder if you're going to end up with an uneven tan. You wonder if anyone else has ever done this experiment. You don't have anything else to do while you wait for your soda tub quarantine to be over, so you decide to look up other Coca-Cola baths. You find a few videos of guys claiming to be doing Coca-Cola baths, but most of them are obviously fake. Your skin is starting to get loose and feel a little raw, and you really want to know what a long-term stay in soda is going to do to organic matter. You might not be able to find the answer in a video of someone doing the same challenge, but you can find the next best thing: science experiments on food. Your first hit is a video of an egg suspended in Coca-Cola for 24 hours, and what you see is almost enough to make you jump out of the bath and end your experiment right now. The video shows what the egg looks like after a night in the cola, and it's disturbing. The eggshell is completely dissolved, leaving a thin, translucent membrane holding the white and the yolk. Is that what's going to happen to your skin? You hope not, but you're able to stay calm long enough to check whether this experiment is the real thing. Sure enough, it's not. The entire thing is a hoax by someone using a plastic egg toy to simulate the dissolved egg. There's no evidence that placing an egg in soda will dissolve its shell. Whew! You wipe the sweat off your forehead, but now you have sticky cola on your forehead. Ew. The next experiment you look at is more reassuring. It's a test on whether a marinade of Coca-Cola will dissolve a piece of meat. As you're made of meat, this seems relevant. It's a long-standing urban legend that leaving a steak in a Coca-Cola bath for 48 hours will dissolve the meat entirely, but it's just that, an urban legend. In fact, the meat can be left in for several days without even starting to break down. What it will do after only a day or so is start to tenderize the meat, making it a handy marinade that adds a tasty and sweet overtone to the meat at your next barbecue. Sounds like a recipe to note down once you're out of the soda bath. It's been a long day inside this cola bath, and you've managed to keep busy by reading up on similar experiments, ordering food, and moving around just enough to keep your body from getting too stiff in one position. You've been taking your arms out of the bath frequently to do things, so they're not that much more pruny than your usual appearance after a bath. They're covered in a film of sticky soda sugar that gets dried after a short time outside the bath and then gets wet and slick again when you plunge them back in. Your lower body is a different story, as it's been in the tub this whole time. Your skin has taken on a pale, flabby appearance, especially near your feet. Your skin is loose and easy to pull away from the body. You have to be careful when you examine it. You don't want to tear any away. The clock is ticking down toward the 24-hour mark, and there's one element of this experiment that's wearing you down: staying up for 24 hours. Whether in your apartment or in a bath of cola, not sleeping for 24 hours is going to cause fatigue. It becomes harder to stay focused and keep from drifting off, which is something you definitely don't want to happen. Slipping under in the bathtub would be a very unpleasant experience. Not only is there the risk of drowning, but you don't want to think about getting that soda out of your hair. You keep focused by moving around and watching a few more videos. Almost there. The alarm clock strikes. It's 24 hours. Time to free yourself of your soda bathtub prison. There's just one problem. You gotta get up. After sitting in a bathtub of a mildly corrosive substance for 24 hours, your body is stiff and painful, and your skin is very sensitive, especially in the area below your waist. You move cautiously, inching your way up and being careful not to pull any muscles or tear any skin. As soon as you stand up and pull the plug, watching the soda go down the drain, you start to feel better. It's time to wash off. But that comfortable feeling doesn't last long, as the normal water starts to wash all the sugar off your skin. Your skin is much more sensitive than normal, as the phosphoric acid in the soda has done to you what it does to all meat: tenderized it. You'll want to be careful while washing yourself off, keeping the temperature moderate and turning down the water pressure so it doesn't feel like millions of little water missiles are hitting you. The slimy coating of sugar is washing away, and your skin is starting to return to its normal feeling. Well, almost normal. Your skin will become tight again shortly, just as it does after any long bath, but it's gonna take a couple of baths for the staining of the caramel color all over your body to disappear. And you're definitely not going to scrub it off now, as sensitive as your skin is. You get out of the shower moving cautiously. Your skin is tender and itchy, and you're tempted to start scratching, but you know that could tear the skin and cause bleeding or infection. The best plan is to wear loose-fitting clothing and let your skin return to normal gradually. This was definitely a less pleasant and stickier experience than sitting in water for 24 hours, but it also won't cause massive physical problems if you're in overall good skin health. This experiment was a success, at least until you have to explain to your friends what happened to your skin.
There's a bright flash of light. You instantly go blind. After a second, you begin to sweat, your skin begins to burn, you feel as if you're being cooked alive. Your cells begin to denature as the heat intensifies. Blood leaks out of your ears. You feel an intense pain like nothing you've ever experienced before. After a few moments, it's all over. Your internal organs give up as a mushroom cloud rises to the sky and blocks out the sun. The distance you are from a nuclear explosion and the type of nuclear explosion determine what will happen to your body when the bomb goes off. All nuclear explosions will have the same kinds of effects on the body. However, it's the size and power of the bomb that influences the radius at which people will experience certain effects. For the sake of argument, we'll assume a 1 megaton nuclear bomb is detonated in your vicinity. This benchmark will be used to help identify the distance at which certain dangers take place. But make no mistake, nothing good comes out of even the smallest nuclear explosions. A nuclear explosion is created by splitting or fusing atoms together. In a 1 megaton bomb, Both nuclear fusion and fission are happening. When these processes are triggered, the bomb releases an enormous amount of energy all at once. This creates a gigantic fireball, a powerful shockwave, and a massive amount of radiation. So what would happen to your body if you were approximately a mile away from a nuclear explosion? When the bomb detonates, it releases all of its energy at once. The moment the explosion is initiated, the temperature and pressure around a mile from the blast site will skyrocket. The temperature can get hotter than the core of our sun and exceed over 15 million degrees Celsius. The intense heat causes a fireball to erupt into the sky and incinerates anything within the surrounding area. If you were standing somewhere within a mile of the nuclear explosion, every cell in your body would instantly be torn apart to its basic elements. The temperature would be so intense that the bonds between atoms would be broken, and the atoms that made your body up would be ejected into the sky. The carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and other elements that once made you would mix into the fireball. Death would come swiftly, and you would no longer exist in your current form. You would survive slightly longer if you were standing between a mile and 3 miles away from a nuclear explosion. However, the explosion would still kill you at this radius, just in a different way. Although you wouldn't be incinerated or completely vaporized at this distance, your body will receive a massive amount of thermal heat and radiation. It would be so intense that seconds after the bomb detonated, your skin would begin to burn. We're not talking about a slight burn like you'd get after spending the day at the beach. We mean your body would burn, as if you were in the middle of a bonfire. The cells throughout your body would begin to denature, and you would develop third-degree burns across your body. Soon after the explosion, your skin would change color, and blisters would break out across your body. During this time, you would feel excruciating pain until all of the nerve receptors throughout your body were destroyed. Unfortunately, this could take several minutes. If you were 2 to 3 miles away from where the bomb went off, you would feel yourself being cooked alive until you either went into shock or your vital organs shut down. Your skin cells would initially turn red as they received massive doses of radiation, but would eventually blacken. Blisters would pop while blood and pus oozed out. You would lose liquids at an astonishing rate due to burns, which would also be one of the contributing factors to your death. Within your body, your vital organs would begin to boil, and even though they're not exposed directly to the rapid change in temperature around you, the cells that make up your heart, lungs, and other vital systems would quickly die. Third-degree burns would even occur inside your body due to intense radiation. This would only increase the amount of pain your body would have to endure. Eventually, the extreme heat and high level of radiation would lead to internal bleeding, and only minutes after the nuclear explosion, you would be dead. If you did somehow survive, you would be praying for death. At some point, your lungs would rupture, your heart would cease beating, and your brain would literally begin to melt. However, since your body would go into shock after 24 to 30% of it was covered in third-degree and second-degree burns, you would pass out long before your internal organs were burnt to a crisp. If you were far enough away to not die immediately from your burns, there would be a good chance that the fires breaking out all around you would consume you in flame. If you were trapped in a building that caught fire, the smoke from the burning wood and other materials would cause you to asphyxiate. As the smoke and radioactive particles filled your lungs, you would struggle to breathe in oxygen. Your cells would not be able to carry out respiration to make energy. Without this vital process, your cells instantly begin to die. You would be simultaneously poisoned and asphyxiated. Regardless of if you were able to seek shelter and endure the initial nuclear explosion, an unseen killer would still be lurking around you. It's this terrifying aspect of a nuclear blast that would kill any survivors in the area. Radiation is one of the deadliest threats to the human body after a nuclear explosion occurs. Unfortunately, just because you survived the thermal heat from the nuke doesn't necessarily mean you're in the clear. If you were within 3 miles of the blast site, you could receive a dose of radiation high enough to immediately cause symptoms of radiation sickness. The DNA in your cells would be torn apart, and as your cells tried to repair each strand, mistakes would be made, resulting in mutations. This would cause basic cellular functions to cease. Proteins that are vital for almost all life processes would be drastically changed by the radiation, resulting in changes in shape. Without the appropriate proteins carrying out their functions, your body would not be able to maintain homeostasis. Cells would begin replicating uncontrollably, which would result in numerous cancers enveloping your body. Cancer itself is the uncontrolled division of your own cells, and unfortunately, the radiation given off by nuclear explosions almost always results in cancer if the dosage is high enough. It's the damage that the radiation causes to the DNA in your cells that causes them to replicate nonstop. However, with the amount of radiation entering your body, you would be long dead before the cancer would kill you. If you were located somewhere between 3 and 6 miles away from the nuclear explosion, the effects on your body become a bit more complicated. You may live longer, but due to certain symptoms that would arise, you might find yourself wishing the initial blast consumed you. The very real threat to your body at this distance is death by flying debris. When the bomb detonates, everything in the vicinity will be instantly superheated and vaporized, causing a massive change in air pressure. This pressure change results in a shock wave that could travel over 150 miles per hour. The closer you are to the blast, the stronger the wind speeds will be. In some cases, the wind could be traveling more than 450 miles per hour, which is enough to blow you off your feet and slam you into whatever's behind you. In this situation, your bones would snap, and you die from blunt force trauma. As the wind forces your body to fly through the air, you'll eventually connect with a solid structure or hit the ground. If you hit your head, the force will shatter your skull, sending shards of bone into your brain, causing instant death. A less merciful way to go would be if your body is slammed into the ground and your own bones puncture your internal organs, causing you to bleed internally, which would eventually induce organ failure and death. At distances further than 3 miles away, you likely won't get swept off your feet, but there's still the danger posed by flying debris. At these speeds, shards of metal, glass, or wood could still hurtle through the air uncontrollably. If anything solid hits you at 150 miles per hour, it would cause serious damage, especially if it's sharp and you're impaled by something like a flying signpost or a sharp branch. Depending on what the nuclear blast flung in your direction and where it hit your body, you could die from blood loss. A less deadly but still destructive side effect of a nuclear blast is called flash blindness. When a nuclear bomb detonates, a large amount of energy is also given off as light waves. These are so intense that anyone looking toward the explosion when it occurs will temporarily or permanently go blind. This phenomenon can affect people that are up to 10 miles away from the blast. The intensity of the light given off by the explosion is increased at night when your retinas are enlarged to naturally take in more light so you can see better. This means that if the bomb goes off when it's dark, the effects of flash blindness can be heightened. The massive amount of high-intensity light waves entering your retina oversaturates the retinal pigment, which in turn means the light entering your eyes can't be resolved into an image and sent to your brain. The further away you are, the less likely you are to go permanently blind, but it isn't a guarantee. Although flash blindness is not fatal, the side effects can be. For example, if you happen to be driving a car when the nuclear bomb goes off and you temporarily become blind, you could smash into an oncoming car, and that would be the end of your story. Similarly, if you were blind after a nuclear explosion, your chances of getting to safety are greatly reduced. And when it comes to treating burns, radiation sickness, and any injuries caused by the blast, urgency is key. But your eyes are not the only part of your body that'll be damaged due to changes in the physical world. When the blast goes off, you may not only experience blindness, but you could go deaf as well. You'll undoubtedly see the bright light from the detonation before you experience anything else associated with the explosion. This includes sound. Nuclear explosions are often depicted as noiseless catastrophes where there's a bright flash of light and a mushroom cloud of destruction. However, in reality, nuclear explosions are excruciatingly loud. If you're within 5 miles of the blast zone, it'll take a few seconds for the sound of the explosion to reach you, but it's coming. The pressure change as a result of the explosion will be around 5 pounds per square inch, which is enough to rupture your eardrums. This wouldn't necessarily be life-threatening, but it would make conversing with other survivors and emergency responders more difficult. You might have a constant ringing in your head where everything could go completely silent. At the same time, your balance would be thrown off, resulting in serious problems when trying to reach safety. There is a different byproduct of a nuclear explosion that doesn't appear to have a huge impact on your body, but could cause you some serious problems. When a nuclear bomb detonates, it releases an electromagnetic pulse outward in all directions. An EMP caused by a nuclear explosion is the result of molecules in the air becoming superheated and ionized. The ionized particles move outward and fry any electronic device they pass through. Your brain and nervous system use electrical signals to communicate with the rest of your body. There doesn't seem to be any effect on local brain processes when someone's exposed to an EMP blast, but it's unclear if there are any long-term implications that we just don't know about yet. What we do know is that animals, like certain migratory birds, rely on Earth's magnetic field to help them navigate and can be greatly impacted by an EMP. The EMP can throw off the mechanisms they use to not only fly in the right direction, but keep from slamming into one another. It might seem far-fetched, but falling birds could pose a serious risk to your health in the aftermath of a nuclear explosion and the subsequent EMP blast. However, that EMP could be deadly to certain people. If you are someone with a pacemaker that keeps your heart beating, you would be in a bad spot if you were within 5 to 10 miles of the explosion. This is the reach an EMP could have, resulting from a large nuclear explosion. A pacemaker has sensors and circuits that monitor heart rate and provide electrical stimulus to the vital organ as needed. However, an EMP would completely fry such a device. In such a situation, the heart would be left to beat on its own. For many people who have pacemakers, their heart isn't strong enough to properly pump blood and nutrients around their body. If you have a pacemaker that becomes disrupted by the EMP released by a nuclear explosion, you would feel a heaviness in your chest as your heart strains itself to keep you alive. This tension would eventually result in a heart attack for most people. If you're someone who relies on monitors to regulate brain function, you would also be negatively affected by the EMP, as any neural stimulus would cease to function. This also includes anyone who is hooked up to a life-sustaining device in hospitals around where the nuclear explosion occurred. These people would begin to flatline moments after the blast, as all these medical devices would be disrupted by the EMP. The EMP released from a nuclear blast may not directly affect the body itself, but it would be deadly for many people in the surrounding area. The number one hazard to your body created by a nuclear explosion is radiation. Unfortunately, the fallout from a nuclear detonation can extend for miles and miles, meaning even if you are far away, a nuclear explosion can still affect you. There are two ways that your body can be exposed to radiation from a distance. The first way is externally, which happens when the irradiated particles are forced outward from the epicenter of the explosion and rip through your skin and body. External exposure is especially dangerous when you're close to the nuclear blast. However, it's the second type of exposure that can have long-lasting consequences for your body and may lead to a life of misery. Internal exposure occurs when you inhale particles that have been irradiated from the nuclear explosion. As discussed before, when the bomb goes off, it vaporizes anything in the vicinity, while also pushing huge amounts of debris into the atmosphere. All the dirt and other particles ejected into the sky are wildly radioactive. The mushroom cloud and smoke that results from a nuclear explosion also contains radiation as well. It's these particles that will eventually coalesce and drop back down to Earth. Unfortunately, those small dust particles can be inhaled, and once in the lungs, can cause serious complications to the rest of your body. The irradiated particles you ingest can infect your cells, causing lung cancer later in life. However, they can also get absorbed into your bloodstream and circulate around your body, wreaking havoc on numerous body systems including the liver and kidneys. If you're over 10 miles away from the blast site, you probably don't have to worry too much about being incinerated or being hit by flying debris. But contamination by radiation is definitely something you should be aware of. This is true even if you're wearing a mask or other PPE to protect you from inhaling irradiated particles, because radiation can find other ways into your body. For example, the food you eat and the water you drink might also contain radiation from a nuclear explosion. If you ingest contaminated food, the radiation enters your digestive system. You could develop stomach, colon, or intestinal cancers, all of which are life-threatening. If you ingest contaminated water, those particles will likely make their way around your entire body and could infect cells in several different organs. The biggest threat radiation causes is cancer. Even if you're far away from a nuclear blast, the particles that enter your body can still cause this disease. And although it may not be immediately life-threatening, the effects of radiation will make the coming years miserable as your body literally destroys itself. If the cancer cannot be contained, you could die as a result of ingesting only a small amount of contaminated food, water, or air. Nuclear fallout can travel great distances depending on weather conditions. This means a nuclear explosion could harm your body even if you're nowhere near where the bomb went off. It's estimated that fallout can travel well over 10 miles on strong wind currents. However, on average, the further away from a blast site you are, the lower the concentration of contaminated particles falling from the sky will be. Far-reaching fallout is the result of vaporized particles from the initial blast being carried away by the wind. As the air cools, these particles clump together and fall to the ground. What it obviously comes down to is that the closer you are to a nuclear explosion, the more likely you are to die. Obviously, if you're close enough to be vaporized with everything else, you will not feel any pain. However, if you survive the initial blast, your body is going to take a beating due to extreme changes in temperature, pressure, and the amount of radiation entering your body.
Maybe you were an underachiever in life. Good news, because thanks to modern science, you can finally accomplish something more than a sick 360 no-scope Call of Duty headshot while living in your parents' basement. All you have to do is die, and if you're really lucky, you'll end up helping the US military out. Humans have hacked other humans apart for a variety of fun reasons since we left the trees in Africa for the open savannas. Typically, our primary reason was war, or just plain old-fashioned murder. But one day, several thousand years ago, the first true medical students got an idea. What if we hacked the human body apart so we could learn how to put it back together again? Sort of. And just like that, the science of anatomy was born. Some of the ancient people who would put the knowledge of anatomy to best use were the Egyptians, who had a variety of shockingly advanced surgical treatments for various ailments. Sadly, primitive medical knowledge still meant most of these patients died anyway, mostly because humans had yet to discover the concept of washing one's hands before shoving them inside the intestines of another. But ancient Egyptians' anatomical expertise was of even better use when you're dead, as they skillfully sliced open corpses to remove and preserve organs during mummification in order to help prevent decay. The science of anatomy would have little effect on improving the lives of the living for several thousand more years, however, when it exploded in popularity during the late 18th century and early 19th century. Empiricism led to the establishment of what we today call modern scientific methods, and this required research and experimentation, a lot of it. There was just one problem for the budding anatomist. They needed bodies to work on, and families were extremely frowny-faced about handing over loved ones to be mutilated in front of an audience. Some donated bodies were received from time to time, but doctors faced yet another problem. People were taking an almost obscene amount of time to die. If you were healthy, you might even live as long as 25 before dying to cholera, or in a horrifying industrial accident, or in Europe's favorite pastime, war. Surgeons circumvented the lack of bodies by simply stealing them. Other less scrupulous surgeons gladly paid others for donated bodies which they knew were being robbed from freshly dug graves. Often doctors would even turn a blind eye to very obvious murder victims. Such was the hunger for bodies to experiment on. Eventually, the government decided enough poor people had been murdered and sold to medical schools and changed the law to allow only donations. This law stands until today in most nations. But what exactly happens when you donate your body to science? Well, first of all, not just anyone can donate their body to science. There are various concerns over the risks your body might pose even after you vacated it. On your quest to become an elaborate prop in some medical student's freshman prank, you'll first have to undergo a screening while still alive. The screening will dive deep into your medical history and include blood work to test you for every disease under the sun. As you'll soon be in the hands of bumbling first-year medical students who won't know your ass from a hole in the ground, there's a serious concern about accidentally contaminating those working on your body. Conditions such as HIV/AIDS, hepatitis B or C, COVID-19, and other highly contagious diseases are an automatic disqualifier, as is being severely overweight or underweight, though occasionally there are special requests for obese donations in order to test new medical devices. That's right, your body won't just go to be clumsily hacked apart by medical students, but could be used to test new medical devices. Testing new medical technology inside living humans is morally challenging due to possible unforeseen malfunctions or unintended consequences. Surgeons, however, also have to learn how to implant the latest doohickey inside a still living person that will hopefully remain still living after the procedure. And that's where your chump corpse comes in. Surprisingly though, age doesn't matter when it comes to body donation. Even if you're extremely old or young, your corpse can be of some use to medical science. There are, of course, extremely old or extremely young people far luckier than you whom a new surgical procedure or medical treatment could help keep alive. Once your screening is complete, your information is kept on file until the day you kick the bucket. Then, instead of going to a funeral home to be embalmed, your body is picked up by the agency you're registered to, who immediately gets to work on preserving your body without actually damaging it with harsh chemicals such as those used at funeral homes. When your body's prepared by a funeral home, a devil's brew of chemicals is used to make you appear lifelike as you rest in your coffin for a final farewell. You'll look the picture of perfect health, even though you're dead, and full of more chemicals than an American supermarket meat. You'll instead go to a freezer where you'll sometimes stay for up to 3 years, until the need arises. After that period, your remains will be cremated free of charge to your family, who can then do with your ashes as they like. If your family is even remotely cool, they'll have you made into a firework. However, if you fit the bill for any number of cadaver requests, you could go on to briefly live a second life in a number of exciting adventures. Your body could be used to practice robotic surgery, as in robots practicing to do the surgery, not practicing doing surgery on robots where you would be completely useless. With the advent of artificial intelligence and telemedicine, the field of robotic surgery is rapidly growing, and you could help pave the way for a future of surgical pods, like the one in the awful Alien movie starring Michael Fassbender. Actually, there's 2 of those at this point. Turns out people are super wary about letting robots hack away at their bodies, so corpses are perfect for letting our future Terminator overlords learn the best way to take apart the human body. You could also, however, end up helping a new surgeon learn his trade or testing laser treatment for acne. That plague on your face may help keep other young teenagers from suffering the humiliation of adolescent pizza face. But if you're really lucky, you'll finally get to do something really cool with your body. The US military is in the business of politely asking people in other countries to stop doing things we don't like, by blowing them up or shooting them full of holes. In order to advance the science of blowing people up or shooting them full of holes, occasionally the US military is in need of cadavers. And that's where you come in. You can help test new weapons by getting shot at. While ballistic gel molds can give us a lot of information about how new weapons perform by simulating human bodies, there's nothing quite like the real thing. Shooting up cadavers can allow military scientists to gather extremely accurate data on how to improve existing weapon designs or even how to help treat and save lives by those wounded by similar weapons. This is the case with the controversial US Army blast experiments, which have for years used corpses of all ages and sizes to test the effects of various explosives on the human body. One man in Arizona was shocked to discover that his dead mother, who had agreed to donate her body to science, had been used to test the effects of IEDs on the human body under various levels of protection. While her son was livid enough to take legal action, by all accounts his mother had a blast. This type of weapon testing is incredibly useful in both creating better weapons and helping protect our troops and save lives, even if it's not exactly the type of science most donors think they'll be helping advance. Some donation agencies allow a donor to opt out of any related testing, but due to the low number of donors, body brokers typically simply leave this possibility out of the brochure for prospective donors. Your body, however, could also be used in industry and government-run safety tests. Vehicle manufacturers may turn to the use of cadavers to test new safety features of a vehicle, or the government could order a round of crash tests using real human bodies to assess new safety procedures or regulations. These tests may sound garish to the still living, but they've helped save countless lives and prevented millions of crippling injuries. Perhaps most surprising of all about donating your body to science, though, is the fact that you're not likely to end up in one piece. Cadavers are frequently dismembered, as various customers need different body parts to experiment on or to complete their shrunken head collection. Your legs may go to a research facility working on new treatments for broken bones, while your hands go to a medical school so surgeons can practice reattaching severed fingers. While legally the donor facility is required to collect all of the remains after their use is over and hand over the cremated ashes to your family, we can realistically assume that there's not a snowball's chance in hell anybody is taking the time to gather up your remains from the far-flung corners of the US. Your family will likely instead receive ashes that are probably, maybe mostly you, along with a few bits of other strangers that they had lying around and needed to get rid of. It's the week after the holidays, and for the last month, you and your significant other have been going to friends' holiday parties and family get-togethers stretching back to Thanksgiving. As normal for the season, both of you have packed on a few pounds from all that goodness being served up in heaping helpings. And now your partner is getting ready for work when suddenly they stop. Turning toward you, your panicked mind can already tell the words they're about to speak, even before their lips form them. Do you think I've put on weight? You hesitate with your answer, hoping that in the half second between them asking and you having to answer, that the earth will suddenly swallow you up. Maybe that big one everybody's always talking about will finally hit the West Coast and rock the nation. Maybe Yellowstone will finally blow up. Maybe World War III will start. But no, nothing happens except for the ever-lengthening stretch of silence and your partner's growing inquisitive look. Do you think I've put on weight? The words rattle in your head as you recall the moment you fell in love together and vowed that you would always tell the truth to your most important person in the world because they deserve it. They're worth it. So what do? If you're like most people, you can tell one of the little white lies that we've all come to accept as part of our social norms. Honesty is a golden virtue, and nobody likes a dirty liar. And yet we grease the wheels of our social interactions every single day with a plethora of little white lies, all meant to help smooth the daily interactions that our modern city-oriented lifestyle besiege us with. Sometimes telling the truth just isn't worth it. We all lie, but how much we lie varies on individual morals. It turns out, though, that how much we expect people to lie depends on their line of work. One study showed that 94% of people expect politicians to lie in their line of work, and we would really like to meet that other 6% who genuinely think they don't. That same study showed that only 27% of people expect their doctors to lie in the course of their work. This disparity is rather interesting when you consider that we probably don't expect our doctors to lie because lives depend on their integrity. And yet, for a politician, the fate of entire nations could rest on their own truthfulness as well. So whether you're a polite little white liar or a liar with pants currently on fire, what exactly goes on in your brain and your body when you tell a lie? And how can you catch a would-be liar? When we lie, often we're given away by the fact that we're simply unable to cue up our verbal and nonverbal behaviors. Our facial expressions may not match the words we're saying, or our posture could be out of sync with our voice. These changes may seem subtle because they are, but after hundreds of thousands of years of communicating amongst each other, we've become evolutionarily hardwired to detect even minute changes in body language. Some of us just happen to be better at it than others. So one of the first things that happen when you lie is you start acting very artificial and inauthentically, setting off the weird alarm deep inside your victim's primitive brain. Their evolutionary training sets off an alarm that something is not quite right about the way you're moving your body in relation to your voice, or that your face isn't quite syncing up with the sadness you're supposed to feel when you're late to work because a truck full of orphans overturned on the freeway and you had to help give CPR. The act of lying involves a careful balancing act on behalf of the liar, which can leave the overworked brain unable to sync up the proper physical movements or emotional displays. That's because when you lie, you're trying to keep track of several narratives all at the same time. Number 1, what you know is true. There was no truck full of orphans on the freeway, and instead you're just late because you had to squeeze in one more match of Fortnite before work. Number 2, what you want to be true. I wish there really was a truckload of orphans on the freeway that overturned, because that would have really been a handy excuse for being late to work, and you'd get to look like a hero for giving them CPR. Number 3, what you're presenting to be true. A truckload of orphans in fact overturned on the freeway, and then some stray kittens were caught in the accident, and you had to stop and give CPR to all of them, and that's why you're late. And number 4, all the proper emotions that are supposed to accompany your made-up narrative. Fear when the truck full of orphans overturned, sadness when they were injured, and determination as you set about giving each orphan and stray kitten CPR. It turns out that managing all of these thoughts at the same time and then trying to fabricate the proper physical reaction is pretty difficult and can lead to inauthentic displays which put people off on your lies. As you begin to weave your tragic tale of trucks, orphans, and kittens, your brain fires up your frontal lobe, which is directly involved in suppressing or inhibiting the truth. The act of imagining things, which is in effect nothing but the exercise of creating lies, is believed to involve activity that passes straight through the frontal lobe, and that's no accident. The limbic system is then activated due to a flood of stress hormones, which are themselves caused by the rising anxiety your brain starts to feel. Fear of being caught in the lie and the mental gymnastics required to successfully pull off a lie all take a huge toll on your brain, and your brain's electrical activity makes it light up like a Christmas tree due to all the frantic activity that takes place. By contrast, telling the truth requires far less brain activity and keeps the brain relatively quiet. Because you're telling a giant whopper, though, your brain is practically doing somersaults as it fires up the regions of your brain needed for imagination. The part of the brain that accesses your memory so you can make sure your lies line up somewhat with reality, and the part of your brain that coordinates your body's physical reactions so it can sell the lie. Basically, you're putting your poor brain through a triathlon, and this causes a huge stress response. This rise in stress signals throughout the body is exactly what a lie detector is tuned to detect, by the way. With all that stress, your heart starts beating just a little bit faster. The bigger the whopper or greater the consequences, the more your heart beats. Many people will often experience a telltale reddening of the ears as well, as the blood rushes to the overworked brain. However, this is not necessarily an accurate method of detecting a lie, as being part of a stressful situation can often produce the same effect. If your ears suddenly start burning red in the middle of normal conversation, though, this could be a pretty good indicator to the people around you that you're telling a fib. Some people believe that you can tell if someone's lying by their eye movements. Erratic movements or an inability to meet your gaze is often considered a sign of lying, but the truth is far more complicated than that. Most people have normally very active eyes when they're in the midst of conversation, but it's hypothesized by some that you can tell what a person is thinking about by simply observing how they move their eyes as they talk to you. If someone looks up and to the left, they're typically thinking about an image that they had to construct themselves, something that they're being asked to imagine. Moving up and to the right, on the other hand, typically signifies that someone is thinking of an image that they've previously seen and are trying to remember. This could be a handy way of spotting a liar if the question you're asking is something visually centered. For example, asking someone if they really did see something they claim to have seen would likely have the person either looking up and left because they're trying to imagine what it is they've claimed to have seen so that they can answer follow-on questions, or up and to the right because they're genuinely recalling a visual memory of what they saw. But this connection between eye movement and cognitive function has been called into question by many and has yet to be conclusively proven one way or the other. Lying and the physical stress it causes also tends to manifest in the shoulders, and you might see someone literally bending over slightly from the sheer weight of the mega whopper they've been telling. A very slight crunch or roll in the shoulders could be indicative of the weight of someone's untruth as it rests on their mind. Often someone under the stress of a particularly big lie will engage in self-pacifying actions, small gestures that bring comfort and help calm us in very stressful situations. This can include things such as touching your face, licking your lips, or massaging your neck, though again, these signs typically only manifest during large or stressful lies. Overwhelmingly though, the stress of a lie will lead to higher blood pressure, as well as an increase in respiration. If someone appears to be breathing just a tad bit faster than normal, this could be a strong indicator that they're telling you a lie. The average person lies 1.5 times within the first minute of meeting someone. The vast majority of this is, of course, the greasing of social wheels, which makes our daily lives livable. Yet, the stress of telling real lies is proven to be detrimental to your health. Lies force your brain to work over time and your body to respond as if in a high-stress situation. The more you lie and the more you have to keep up with old lies and pretend you're not lying, the more stressed out your body and brain become. So take a cue from us and learn to live telling the truth, because in the end it turns out that honesty really is the best medicine in this case. Sure, you might have to deal with a few awkward social situations, but as long as you're respectful and polite, people will learn to value and even admire you for your unshakable integrity. And anyone who doesn't, frankly, isn't someone worth keeping in your life in the first place, because they're probably a liar themselves. If you think about the things that we fear most, you'd probably guess that most of us fear death more than anything else. But it's not like we wake up each day worrying that this particular day might be our last. According to the experts, what we really fear each and every day is some kind of failure. It turns out, according to psychological surveys, that one failure we are extremely frightened of is giving a public speech and coming across as a moron, or perhaps bumbling our words, freezing on the spot, or just not doing a good job. In an article in Psychology Today, it's explained that this fear of messing up in public is hardwired into our genes. In the past, we lived as groups and we hunted as groups. We were social animals and we had to collaborate to survive. If we failed to become a worthy member of that group, we got kicked out. And that would almost certainly mean we would not survive very long. We had to perform, and if we didn't, the other part of the tribe had zero tolerance, because a weak member would surely result in the rest of the group being harmed. To give an example, if you were on watch and told to look out for big cats that could feast on members of the group, and you didn't perform very well that day, someone might lose a limb, an eye, or a life. There is and always has been a lot of pressure on people to not mess up. And that's why there is inbuilt into our psyches the fear of ostracism. That basically means the fear of being kicked out of the group. One psychologist said this: "To my knowledge, in the animal kingdom, ostracism is not only a form of social death, it also results in death. The animal is unable to protect itself against predators, cannot garner enough food, etc., and usually dies within a short period of time. And it's this fear that gives people the shakes when they go on stage, why athletes get the butterflies in their stomach, why most of us would rather pull off a fingernail than stand up in front of lots of people and attempt to say something meaningful. We just don't want to be ostracized from the group. It's not as if these days we have to be on watch, looking out for big-toothed, furry threats. So for most people, when they have the choice, they'd rather not take a risk and get up in front of people. If we have to do that, we often go wobbly at the knees. As one person put it, "My tongue stuck to the roof of my dry mouth, and I couldn't swallow. I blushed, I sweated, and trembled." We know that we shouldn't act like this, because if we didn't fear being rejected, we would not try so hard to be good. As you might have seen even on social media, those that have no fear are often those that make fools of themselves. You have to find the middle ground, and that means to be self-effacing enough to be intelligent, but not so critical that you can't even perform. But just what is going on in your head when you're asked to speak in public? First of all, you're not alone if you've ever suffered speech anxiety, or what's known as glossophobia. As we've said, you'd actually be inhuman to not fear messing up. Some have it worse than others, though. We are told what happens to many people when they get up in front of a crowd is first they have a rise in their heartbeat. Some of you might know that sometimes this might feel like your heart is beating itself out of your chest. Ladies and gentlemen, ba-bump, 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 I think I'm having a heart attack. No, you're not. What's happening is a bunch of stress hormones are flooding through your brain. Remember your ancestor who took some Z's while on watch when a saber-toothed tiger was having the kids for dessert? These hormones, such as epinephrine and cortisol, are your friends. They're letting you know the situation is tense. Technically, what happens is a part of your brain called the hypothalamus triggers the pituitary gland to make some of the hormone ACTH. To cut a long story short, this produces adrenaline. The good news is, once this burst of adrenaline is over, you might get into a groove. This awards you with dopamine, and when a job is done, you might feel satisfied. That satisfaction in neurochemical terms means a shot of serotonin. Maybe people clap, give you a slap on the back, and that's the love hormone oxytocin working for you. But before everyone lives happily ever after, you have to deal with the girl of your dreams in the crowd, and you have to suddenly be endowed with the shakiest voice on the planet. You've broken out in a sweat and are hoping for some kind of Deus Ex Machina ending, and for the world to swallow you. Now, this might not be as bad for some as for others. We're sure that a few of you right now know exactly what it's like to have to stand up at a company meeting or in class on one of those horrid days when some cruel person has said, "Okay, can each of you just say a few words about yourself?" Some of us are more anxious than others. Some of us blush when asking a supermarket worker how much the bananas are. Some of us just produce too much adrenaline. If that's you, rest assured that you're likely not the person to put any old remark down in the comments box. The social anxiety can at least make some people feel very self-aware and critical. If that is you, please go ahead after the video and introduce yourself to the group. Just kidding. We like something the evolutionary biologist Charles Darwin once said when he was at a zoo in London. He was at the snake enclosure and putting his face right up to the glass. When the snake struck at the glass, he jumped back, his heart beating, feeling a freezing of fear. He said, "My will and reason were powerless against the imagination of a danger which had never been experienced." This ancient reaction is hardwired, and for good reason. You've all likely heard boxers saying, "Of course I was scared I was gonna lose. That's what makes me the boxer I am." Any good writer or novelist has all kinds of fears about not being good enough, but that's what makes them better. That's how they became good writers. We're told that if you fear writing or speaking or performing, it's a good idea to get set up first. One thing you can do is follow the 3 R's. That's reason, reveal, and resolution. Don't just wing it. Figure out what your reason is for speaking and then figure out what you're going to reveal to the audience. At the end, give them a conclusion or a resolution. If you don't have the 3 R's, maybe don't speak just yet. Yes, that doesn't always work when some sadistic teacher has asked you, the new boy in class, to introduce yourself. "Hi, my name is Jeff, I like sports and oh, someone kill me." But before you reach for the Xanax, just try to remember that there aren't any lions about. Nothing is that important. At the end of the day, nothing matters enough to ruin your day. We are all perfect failures in some ways, and because you know this, you're at least self-aware. That's commendable. Even though some of you might feel paralyzed when getting up on stage, the more you learn to care less, the better you'll defeat those demons. Jump when the snake lunges at you, but be aware there's always some metaphorical glass between you and your audience. At the same time, when you leave your comment below, be aware that thousands, maybe millions of people will see it. As one writer once said, every time he writes something he imagines, it's the last thing he'll ever say. This doesn't cause fear, but he said it makes him think wisely about what he says. Next time you're getting ready for your public speaking, make sure your presentation is as best as it can be so that you can focus on yourself. But how can you do that? Elements by Envato offers you over 9,000 presentation templates, along with over 1 million other assets, such as vectors, photos, music, and so much more. You can download unlimited files for a small monthly fee. There isn't a deal like that out there. And if you're serious about your next presentation, you should give it a try. Click the link in the description and save time starting today. Now over to you. Please leave a comment about how you deal with public speaking. How do you cope with anxiety? Do you have any tips for the others here? Remember, lots of people are looking at what you said. Tell us what you think in the comments. Also, be sure to check out our other video, I didn't sleep for a week and this happened. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.